Hello, everyone, and welcome to APS webinars. The title of today's webinar is How to Shape Your Pitch. I'm Crystal Bailey, and I'll be your host for today's broadcast. Thank you all so much for joining us. APS webinars are brought to you as a service of the American Physical Society, connecting you with the expertise of individuals who can offer insight into physics careers, educational programs, and professional development for students, working physicists, and educators. Peter, could you scroll ahead one?
I'd be happy to, Crystal.
Thank you. APS membership gives you easy access to valuable career information and resources like this webinar. It allows you to get your research out to the community and network with potential employers or colleagues at our meetings, have a greater positive impact on issues that are important to you through grassroots advocacy, and helps you find a community of like-minded folks through participation in our forums, divisions, and topical groups. If you are not yet an APS member but value the things that APS provides, we do kindly encourage you to consider joining today. There's the URL, aps.org/membership to find out more information. Okay, next slide, please. Today's presentation features Peter Fiske, who I'll introduce in more detail in a second, but first, some housekeeping. The first portion of our broadcast will be Peter's presentation, and then we will have a lengthy Q&A period at the end. If you'd like to ask a question, please type it into the questions panel that's located on the right side of your screen. You can submit questions or responses through this panel at any time, and I believe we will be doing some interactive stuff with you, so that'll be your way to communicate with us. You can also open and close your GoToWebinar panel using that little orange arrow, which is on the right-hand side, and you can, of course, adjust your audio options, mic and speakers or telephone using the button there. Lastly, a link to the recording of today's presentation will be emailed to you after the event and will be made available on the APS Summer Webinar homepage. We ask you for, it takes 48 hours for us to do that video upload. So that's when you can expect those, that video and that email. We also encourage you to complete a survey when you exit so that APS webinars can improve its ability to provide you with these valuable services. Really quickly, I also want to mention, if you can scroll one more, Peter, we do have a few more upcoming broadcasts for the summer webinar series. Peter is doing a webinar next week that we are all extremely excited about, effective communication using online tools. Lord knows we all need support with that.
I'm afraid so.
Yeah, so more from Peter and his wonderful, engaging style next week, so please tune in for that. We also have a couple webinars coming up on graduate programs and student success and pursuing careers in science policy. Can you click one more, Peter, please? That's the URL to go and join the list if you want to make sure you get updates on when these are coming out in the summer webinar series. All right, so let me quickly introduce—
Don't forget chain reaction.
Don't forget chain reaction. Thank you. There's one more announcement we want to make. Thank you, Peter. My lovely assistant. So because these webinars that Peter's doing are on innovation and entrepreneurship, we wanted to mention this cool program at Argonne National Lab. It's a 2-year program. You know, if you participate, you get salary benefits, use of equipment and office space. You also get assistance developing business strategies, conducting market research, finding long-term financial financing and potential commercial partners. It's basically support on starting your own innovation, your own.
It's basically, Crystal, Lawrence Berkeley Lab, where I work, has a similar program called Cyclotron Road. It's basically a 2-year postdoc to start your business. It helps if you've got a technology that has a potential for commercialization, but needs some advanced tools to further advance and demonstrate the technology and the business model. Chain Reaction is a 2-year postdoc for you and your team, and it's really an extraordinary program.
Ah, fantastic. Thank you for that information. So that's the URL at the bottom of the screen if you want to go apply for that. Pre-applications are open now. The official applications open on September 15th, and I understand they're doing some informational webinars on that. So please check that out. Okay, and next, this mysterious man who we've been talking about.
Disembodied voice. That's right.
Peter Fiske.
Although Crystal, we have a number of people on today who have been attending the previous webinars. So some of you have heard of this before. So this is me.
Yes, Peter Fiske, who is the executive director of the National Alliance for Water Innovation, which is a coalition between labs, universities, and U.S. water companies committed to developing game-changing technologies to enable distributed desalination and water reuse. So just 3 things you should know about Peter if you haven't been to one of these previous webinars. Peter is a serial entrepreneur and seasoned senior executive. He has a lot of experience with starting companies and getting new initiatives going. Peter also is an excellent public speaker and career coach. He has presented at APS March meeting many years in a row, always gets 10 out of 10. He's also the author of the book, Put Your Science to Work, which is one of the most popular career guides for people in the sciences. You can find that, I believe, online at Amazon. And Peter and I have been working together for nearly 10 years and have had some great times together.
That's right.
So Peter, please take it away.
Thank you, Crystal. Well, everybody, welcome to the 3rd in our summer series about communication, about strategy, about entrepreneurship. And today's session is a particular one about how to shape your pitch. And I'll start off by reminding you where we are in our seminar series. We talked about technology commercialization, and this is me. But last time, on July 21st, we dived into some business concepts called value proposition and customer segments, and then talked about how you can utilize these, these frameworks in any sort of activity, not just starting a business, but even potentially understanding your relationship with your PhD advisor and how to maximize the benefits to both sides. We talked about concepts like value proposition. And what is a value proposition? We said it was the benefit that a customer segment derives by adopting the product or service enabled by your innovation. Technology is great, right? Do customers care about my technology? No, they don't care. Customers care about solving their problems. In as much as your technology helps them solve a problem or gain something, then it's relevant to them. But the technology itself doesn't matter. And this is often something that is emotionally very hard for physicists. You know, like all this work, all this focus on our technologies ends up not really being what a customer needs. A customer needs a solution to a problem. In last session, we talked about this concept of product market fit. That you have a particular customer profile, a customer segment, and customers have gains, things that they want to achieve more of. They have pains, things about their job or their activity that is stressful and frustrating to them. And they have a set of workflow or tasks that they have to do in their job. And it's critically important for you to understand and profile each customer segment. And on the other side, we talked about your invention or your innovation and how it creates gains for a customer segment, how it alleviates pains for the customer segment, and all the features and benefits associated with that product or service. And we found out the most important thing about understanding whether you have an interesting technology either for commercialization or even for research. And that is, you've got to find out what the actual problems are, not just what's interesting, but what's useful. And how do we do that? Last time we talked about the most important skill of all, getting outside the building, getting off the campus and getting out to talk to people. So these were critical tasks and issues that we recommended you consider as an early career physicist, either an undergrad or grad student, or even in a professional physics career. So in last session, we talked about that customers don't care about technologies, they care about solving problems, that a technology's value proposition is the benefit a customer segment derives from using it, that customers are people, not industries. When we work on a technology or work on solving a problem, we have to understand that ultimately people make the decision about adopting our new technology. People have work they need to do, they have pains they want to alleviate, they have gains they like to increase. And the best value propositions for an invention or an innovation are direct benefit to the customer, are uniquely delivered by your product, are specific and quantitative, and that the customer would actually say the value proposition and understand it. And we wrapped up by talking about this methodology in the context of your relationship to your PhD advisor and how they represent a customer segment with pains and gains. So that's what we did last week. This week, I want to turn our attention to specific strategies of communication. Now, I know that in a physics training and in a physics career, you have ample experience communicating. You communicate through publications, you communicate through talks. But I want to start us off by understanding what the definition of communication is. Communication is the act or process of using words, sounds, signs, or even behaviors to express or exchange ideas. And this is very important because I think in the academic and the physics environment, we tend to think of written communication and sort of presentations as being the primary way that we communicate. But you have to realize that you're communicating all the time, whether you know it or not, through how you present yourself, your physical posture. In fact, we can even look at people speaking in other languages. We don't even need to know what those languages are. We can know a little bit about at least the tone of what's being said here or here. So human beings are very good at picking up subtle cues. We're highly evolved social animals. We pick up on these subtle cues and they signal a bunch of things that are important to us as we listen to people. Your fitness, your power. We are also, as a species, highly biased towards social behavior and cooperation. So we're always hunting for ways to connect. And we're also predisposed to favor those genetically similar to ourselves. This is known in neuroscience as the selfish gene theory. This is one of the ways in which we can sometimes struggle when we deal with people who are coming from different parts of the world, and the lack of similarity to us can sometimes cause people to have more of a barrier or an inhibition to opening up and listening. As a physicist, you have to understand that these are phenomenologies with humans, and of course your fellow physicists are humans, and understanding how they work is critical to you being effective in your communication. So as a result, with all this baggage that we have as Homo sapiens, our brains are in a constant dialogue between sort of our forebrains, which govern executive function and kind of just, are thinking about problem solving and planning, and a deeper part of our brain, the limbic system, which governs emotion and reaction. And let me show this to you. So I want you to, let's do an experiment together. So everybody go to the question window, open up the question window. Does everybody go over there? Yeah, click on that window, click on that. Yep. Okay, so you've got the question window open. We're gonna do a very brief experiment together, all right? And I want you to open up the window and get ready to type in a short numerical answer. This is gonna be a number to a simple arithmetic question that I'm about to give you. Are you ready? Okay, get ready and open up that questions window. Crystal is going to be monitoring your answers and she's going to be telling me.
I'm watching.
Okay, all right, guys, here's a simple arithmetic question. A bat and a ball together cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Everybody, as quick as you can, type in your answer. Go ahead, type it in.
Okay, we're getting a lot of responses. Wow, ooh, all over the place. There's some 10 cents, a lot of 10 cents, a lot of 5 cents.
Right? Yeah, what, Crystal?
We got some 5 cents. We got a couple fours. Whoa. Yeah, mostly 10 cents, but a few folks said 5.
Wait, I mean, these are physicists, Crystal, right?
Indeed.
People know mathematics, right? Okay, wait a minute. Let's do some math together. Let's do some math. Okay, ready, Crystal? Okay, bat and a ball costs $1 a ton. X plus Y is $1.10, and the bat costs $1 more than the ball. Okay, X equals Y plus $1. You got me with me so far, Crystal?
I'm with you.
Oh, wait a minute. Okay, so let's do a substitute. Wait a minute, Crystal. Oh, look at that. Why the ball costs 5 cents? What just happened, Crystal? What just happened?
You were tricksy. That's what just happened.
Well, I guess, but actually, our friends who are listening today shouldn't be worried because, frankly, this is a common experiment. This experiment's been done around the world 50% of undergraduate students at MIT, Princeton, and Harvard get this quote unquote simple math problem wrong. And in fact, the fact that even for those of you physicists that you are, had an immediate reaction to what that number should be versus what the number actually should be is the subject of a wide range of very exciting neuroscience research. And because we think we would like as physicists, right, to believe that we behave like this, right, that we're logical, that we think through all our actions. But sadly, we are Homo sapiens. We actually think like this, right? Or actually not even like this. Most of the time we're thinking some form of this. So we are sadly prone to these differences in thinking. And the reason I bring this up is that while our brain, our beautiful brain that's evolved this wonderful neocortex, which is all of our rational planning, all of our language, our formulation of ideas, we have at the core deeper subsystems. And those subsystems often operate without our realizing it. Why is this important to communication? Because this is what's happening in your audience's brain. You've got to be very concerned about what's going on in your audience's brain. And this issue of how we think and how people might react to our thoughts has been the subject of an enormous amount of research, including from this wonderful man, Daniel Kahneman, who received a Nobel Prize in economics. And his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, is a marvelous book. And I strongly recommend it to everybody who, who is listening today, because it is really, for a thoughtful physicist such as you are, it's a marvelous exploration into the research in how people think. Now, Daniel Kahneman and his colleagues have come up with a sort of framework for how we think. And he basically says that the human brain is working with two systems simultaneously, system one and system two. Now, system one is fast, it's automatic, it's instinctive, and it often relies on stereotypes. It often is emotional and it's subconscious. And it's most of what we do our thinking with. It's fast, automatic, instinctive reactions. This is what happened to you when you saw the $10 number and the dollar number. This part of your brain instinctively said $10, a dollar, the difference is 10 cents, and you wrote 10. However, there's another system. It's slower, it's more effortful. And some of you, in fact, utilized this system when you wrote 5 cents. You smelled, you sensed that there was a trick, right? And you stopped yourself and you said, well, let me work out the math and let me actually calculate what the difference is in cost between the bat and the ball. And you arrived at 5 cents. But you had to deliberately stop yourself. That's system two. Now, as physicists, we think that we live in system two, right? That's what we do. We do analyses, we do studies, we document things, very effortful, very deliberative. But even you have to admit that at times, even in science, we live in a system one world. We might be worried that certain reviewers are biased against us, or that professor on my committee hates me, things like that. We, even as physicists, understand that we live in a system one world as well. And here's the big idea from Kahneman's work, and here's the big idea for you as a communicator. Most of people's reactions to you, most of our decisions are based on system one, not system two. System two is in fact lazy. It actually takes a lot of metabolic energy to use system two. And system two, most of the time, spends the time rationalizing and being a spokesman for system one. So technical communicators, such as yourselves, have to recognize that in your audience, both systems have to be addressed for you to have maximum effect in communicating your ideas to people. You need to understand that they're simultaneously rational thinkers and also emotional beings. So I did not know this. I will admit to you. When I started my first company, I was selling high-end kind of optical assemblies and optical components to technical people in technical organizations, right? I was in the world of physics. And so I thought I knew exactly how to sell to my peers in these companies. First of all, I would deeply research my prospective customer, and I would present a case to them that's ideally suited to their needs. I'd explain all the issues and exactly what they needed. I would then go into deep detail about the specifics of the optical components that we were manufacturing. I would talk about their features and benefits. I'd go into all that detail. I would also make sure that they understood the features and significant benefits that these optics had. And in some cases, I would even go through a cost-benefit analysis, because even if our optical assemblies were more expensive than the competitor, their performance was far better and they had a much better return on investment, right? I did all that great work, maybe 50, 60 slides, and then I asked them how many would like to order. And then I often found out that they didn't want to order. Even with all this evidence I'd given them, they didn't want to order. You know, what was I doing wrong? Well, I realized that what I was doing was, sadly, I was thinking entirely in system 2. I was thinking that I could make an argument solely based on logic, solely based on data, and I wasn't appreciating that I was talking to humans. And because I'm talking to humans, I also have to address other things that matter to those humans. So effective persuasion, even technical persuasion, requires appealing to both systems. You have the system 2 work you need to do. You need to establish your credentials as a physicist. You need to demonstrate the facts and knowledge of what you're doing, and you need to present a firm argument with logic and data and information, right? You have to do that, but you also have to address system 1. You have to be trustworthy and believable. You have to have some degree of authoritativeness so people will believe you. You have to be interesting. You also have to be, to some extent, sympathetic and safe, and in some cases, funny. So this is a challenge for communicators. You have to simultaneously solve 2 completely different boundary conditions. Now, this work, this understanding that we simultaneously have to present ideas and then also have to help people kind of emotionally accept those ideas, is well-founded research. There's been lots that's gone on. We don't talk about it a lot in physics, but it certainly is a main subject of study in sociology and psychology. Even with professional salespeople who do this for a living often misestimate how much time should be spent on these other aspects of communication. So for example, one study asked a bunch of very successful technical salespeople selling a technical product in a technical market, and they said, if you were going in to give a pitch, how should you distribute the time that you have to give your pitch? And the average answer from all these technical professionals who sell for a living said, well, 70% of the time, I should focus on the technical solution. I should tell them about my products, tell them about why they work, etc. And I also have to absolutely think about the chemistry, just like, you know, be warm and inviting, be an approachable person. I have to demonstrate that I understand their business and their business needs. And I've got to also understand the quote unquote politics and decision making. For example, that even if I present a technical solution, there are other people in their organization who are going to be factors in deciding whether or not they actually want to purchase, okay? So this 70, 10, 10, 10 is what most salespeople believe the optimal distribution of time is on the ideal technical pitch. Then the researchers went to talk to the people being pitched, and they asked them what was the ideal set of investments that they would like to see. But people answered very differently. They said that yes, the technical solution is still very important to us, and 40% of the time we should talk about that. But a much larger fraction of the time, people want to hear about, do you understand the situation? Do you understand how the decision-making process is going to be made? And are you a person who we can trust? Are you a person we feel comfortable with? Okay? So here you go. Even with technical professionals who sell for a living, they tend to overestimate how much time should be spent on the information, and they underestimate the time spent on the relationship. And this is, I think, a key factor for you to consider. You are all great students. You are all doing fabulous work. You're working very hard. And it's easy to think that the technical work you're doing is the most important thing about you. In many encounters, even in technical talks, it's important for you to address these other subjective factors. So how can you do this? How can you establish trust, with people you don't even know? right? Why should they trust you? Well, it turns out that Homo sapiens are very good at detecting things that either engender trust or make people nervous and engender concern. One of the things that Homo sapiens do is when they get agitated, they talk very fast and they talk very high. So slow down, speak clearly, and use silence strategically, because silence can sometimes stop an audience and pull their attention back to you. You should also be careful about how fast you pace the delivery of information, even in a technical audience. You want to make sure that people have a firm grasp on where you are now before you take the next step on the next slide. You should also adopt confident body postures and gestures. This means, literally practicing so that you speak, you stand up straight, that you're clear and friendly, that you're not closed in your body posture. The data itself are important, and it is valuable and important to present the data clearly in a manner that can be understood, because when an audience member looks at a graph that's too small and the axes are too small and they're squinting, they're trying to see what is this person saying, what happens emotionally is they feel fear. Wait, I'm not understanding this. I don't know what this is. And that fear can then engender a sense of resentment. Well, I'm frustrated. This isn't a good speaker. I don't trust her. So legible labels, clear charts and graphs, and also a common tendency I see in physics talks is people like to throw all the information out. They figure, well, I mean, all of it's important, right? And my audience will just pick and choose which to listen to. Don't make your audience do that work. Choose the subset of data that most importantly makes your point and omit the stuff that is tangential. Also, it's really valuable in the academic community to acknowledge the work of others, particularly those in the audience. One very common way that you can lose trust is you can talk about a subject and not recognize that there's some people in the audience who actually have some experience in the field. The other thing that sociologists and neuroscientists have studied is the fact that audiences and audience members have some very specific archetypes. And it's very helpful as you're building your talk, you're thinking about your slides, to think about the different archetypes and how your talk is going to address their needs and concerns. So there are different communication styles with people, and people come into the room with different motivations and values. So there's some interesting studies, and I'll present kind of one framework that people have used to think about audiences for a technical talk. So one axis is people sort of come in two different flavors on a spectrum. Some people are task-oriented. They like to focus on activities, and some people are people-focused. They like and enjoy and derive energy from being around people. So you have audience members somewhere on this axis. Then you have another axis. Some people are very declarative. They are more assertive. They want to tell. And then some audience members prefer to elicit. They want to ask. And in this framework, in this quadrant framework, we can now think about how there are different audience members listening to your technical talk. So for starters, we have 4 names for these different quadrants. We have the expressives. We have what we call the amiables. We have the driver. And we have the analytical. Okay, so let's talk about each of these 4 archetypes, each types of audience members sitting and listening to your talk. First, the expressives. The expressives tend to be high energy. They're big picture people. They like exploring big ideas. They're visionary and they're competitive. They actually are creative. They tend to be ego-driven, and they tend to have a low attention to detail. So they tend to be very interested in the high-level part of your talk and the introductory part of your talk, and they're going to kind of get less interested as you go into the details. Now, the amiables are very different. These are people. You can usually tell the amiables because they're the ones who come early to your talk. They'll sit down, they'll introduce themselves, they'll be checking with other people, they value social relationships, and they actually like meetings. They're team-oriented, they like consensus, and in particular, amiables don't like conflict. So when there's sort of a technical dispute during a talk and somebody disputes something, amiables get a little nervous, right? Now, next person who comes to the room is the driver. You can usually tell the driver because they're late. They're 5 minutes late. They come in very quickly, they sit down, they're outcomes oriented, they value their time, and they tend to ask very specific questions. Yes or no? Did you do a standardization on X or that? They are also objective driven. Unlike the amiables, they actually don't mind conflict, and sometimes they actually cultivate a little bit of conflict in their questions and answers. And these drivers are often decision makers. So sometimes these might be professors, sometimes a department chair, sometimes a key decision maker. The other person in the room you probably didn't even notice, and that's the analytical. The analytical is process oriented. They are very focused on detail. They actually have no sense of urgency, and they're very risk averse. They tend to ask questions. They like options. They like to see the evidence. They value accuracy. And even if they're not a key decision maker, they're often a key influencer. So for example, let's imagine you've given a job talk for an assistant professorship at a university, and you've given your very well-polished job talk, et cetera, and you leave the room. The expressive loves the idea that you're working in a field that's growing in physics, that you're going to impact climate change and big picture stuff. The amiable really valued that you were warm with the graduate students, that you seemed approachable, that you were nice looking and you were friendly. The driver appreciated that you had experience at a national lab and that you could bring in some of the tools and resources for the graduate students and undergrads from that national lab. And then everybody turns and looks at the analytical. And she says, the speaker didn't have any error bars on any of her graphs. So sometimes, even though they are very small in the whole grand scheme of things, analyticals in a technical talk can be very important part of, a very important constituent for you to win over. So how do you win over each of these different types of people? Because you realize that in giving a technical talk, you now have to address 4 completely different types of people. And that's very challenging, but you can do it by thinking about how your talk, how elements of your talk are addressing these different constituencies. So for example, for the expressive, you can ask yourself, well, how important is it for me to stay focused on the big picture? How many introductory slides should I have? How should I express that my research is, visionary and forward thinking? That's going to please the expressive. For the amiable, I want to make sure I maintain some safety, that I express things and I come across as happy, as comfortable, as friendly. And for the driver, I want to make sure that I appear to be somebody who gives results, that has a clear understanding of how to do my work and that sort of thing. So that the driver can get out of there and move on to the next meeting. And finally, for the analytical, I have to ask myself in my talk, how important is precision and detail to my audience? Where have our ideas been tested, and where are we on more speculative ground, and where did our ideas come from? So as you think about your talk and you're putting together your slides, think about each of these 4 people and ask yourself, what part of my talks are going to appeal to each of these 4 demographics? Also realize that audiences come with their own biases. They have past history, and it's helpful to know what that past history is. They have past achievements that they're proud of. Certain departments, certain companies have almost mythological past stories of their success. It's important to know what they're proud of. Also, people can be loyal and trust certain people and not other people. What excites or bores them? What past career successes are each audience member trying to replicate? So these subjective things, you're like, well, how am I going to know any of this stuff? Well, here's where informational interviewing really pays off. Now, in my regular workshop at the APS spring meeting, I talk about the value of informational interviewing as part of your job search. And I won't go into it in much detail here. We'll probably spend some time on it later in the webinar series. But informational interviewing is the process of seeking out people to talk to at organizations that interest you and simply asking questions. And questions like this: I'm going to give a talk at Purdue University. They have an opening for an assistant professorship in physics. I think I'd be perfect for it. Can you tell me more about the history of Purdue's physics department? What have been their key successes? What do they consider their strengths? What are past achievements that they want to replicate? Those are great questions to ask people as you prepare for giving a job talk. Now, in addition to all the construction that you've done, all the slides that you've designed, all the practice that you've done in giving your talk, there's also this nonverbal communication that's critically important. We are Homo sapiens, so we are very focused on the face and eye contact. We are very focused on the voice, as I said earlier. If you are nervous, you tend to speak at a higher pitch and you tend to speak faster, and it also leaves people with the impression that you're nervous and agitated, and it tends to make them nervous and agitated too. The word choice and the language that you use also matters. In a technical audience, you should use technical terms that are suitable and appropriate. Deconvolution, Hamiltonian, those would be totally appropriate in a technical audience. In contrast, if you're giving a talk, for example, to undergraduates or a lay audience, you might say, instead of deconvolution, mathematical solution, or instead of a Hamiltonian, you can say, the mathematical transformation of this to that. Using word choice can help you better align with your audience. Gestures and movement should be smooth, confident, and open, and your body language and posture should signal confidence and being relaxed. Now, I know, and you are not confident and relaxed. You are scared. You are nervous about how this talk is going to go. Many people say that public speaking is among the most stressful things they ever do in their lives. But this is where practice matters. You need to practice so that you can at least seem calm and seem relaxed. Your level of energy has to be strong but not agitated, and attire, how you dress. Homo sapiens are the only animal that can radically shift its exterior, performance. We can choose clothing and choose clothing that signals are not just our social status, but how we understand what is appropriate in the social environment. You wouldn't go to an APS meeting and give a talk in a tuxedo, right? No, you wouldn't do that. You also probably wouldn't do that in flip-flops and a t-shirt. So we know a little bit about how attire signals our understanding of the social environment. If you're uncertain about whether one outfit or another outfit might be suitable, ask your friends. This is where friends can really help you. All this stuff, this takes practice. It really does. It's and not just practice on a particular talk, but multiple talks. The more time you spend giving technical talks and even general talks, the better you become. In the same way that the more time you spend playing badminton or ice skating makes you a better skater. For years, I thought that good presenters think about what they're saying. But what I realized was that great presenters don't think about what they're saying. They think about what the audience is hearing. Great presenters, sort of like we said in our last webinar about good entrepreneurs, great presenters are very empathetic. They really try to think about what the audience is after. They try to think about what the audience is seeking, and then they adjust their message to make sure that they address the needs of the audience. Good communication requires empathy, sensitivity, and insight into what's important to the other person, which gets back to the previous webinar where we talked about customer profiles. In order for you to have a better understanding about what's important to another person, you need to get out there and find out. You need to talk to people. You need to learn about what their job is, what their gains are, and what pains they encounter. So instead of a very kind of like technical and physics orientation to technical presentation, where I say, here's my idea and here's why it is good, what I'm recommending you consider is a broader perspective. Here are your challenges and opportunities and the criteria needed for best solution, and here is my idea for that solution and my credentials for delivering it, okay? You're giving almost the same talk, but instead of just focusing on your ideas and focusing on your technical work in your talk, you are also helping signal to the audience that you understand them and you appreciate their challenges, and you've got something that can help them overcome their challenges. So in order to be heard, you have to connect. And this is where I think sometimes physics education can really, be a challenge, because so much of graduate school and postdoc training, we're taught that science should speak for itself, right? And that, in fact, personal feelings are relevant to the acceptance of scientific work. And granted, we have a lot of mechanisms in doing science where we try to prevent personal feelings from being a factor in accepting a scientific idea. We have anonymous peer review. We have merit review. We have all these ways in which we try to keep our processes and keep our decision making in system 2. And that works. But in reality, even academia works largely on the same impulses to trust, believe, or mistrust and doubt based on human factors. And as a physicist, these are inescapable. You have to at least understand these mechanisms and adjust your technical communication accordingly. Now, sometimes people resent this. They call that, oh, that's politics, people making those decisions. Well, sadly, it's called being human. And I'm not saying be manipulative, but do understand that you need to satisfy more than the technical side of the equation. You need to satisfy that other boundary condition of making people feel comfortable and open to your ideas. I will tell you that with a physics background and with warmth, confidence, and engagement, combined with all that technical skill, honesty, integrity, that is a killer application. That is really, because everybody will believe, and as a physicist, you are incredibly smart, hardworking, and honest. They will take that as a given. When you also show up with warmth, confidence, and an interest in engagement, you will then erode some of the negative stereotypes they have about physicists, that we're nerdy and not interested in other people and just interested in our science. So it can be a very powerful combination. Now I want to kind of wrap up and just give you some final tips on, some things that might seem very obvious to you, but I find that being a Homo sapiens is a lot of work. And one of the most stressful things is meeting people for the first time. How can I make a good first impression when I meet people, when I walk in the room, when I'm getting set up to give my talk? So here's some basic tips. First of all, when you meet people, make eye contact. Here is a very specific protocol that I found works well in the United States for making the right amount of eye contact. When you meet somebody, you reach out their hand, you shake their hand, and you make a note of the color of the other person's eyes. Look at their eyes long enough to detect what color are their eyes. In North America, that is a perfect amount of time to establish trust and engender respect. Now, also, give a good handshake. Handshakes are a remarkable, sort of gesture. It's a bit counterproductive, or at least counterintuitive, especially in today's era of coronavirus, because hands are known to be some of the dirtiest objects on the human body. And yet, throughout history, we've always done this gesture of shaking hands, right? Well, now we're not doing that, we're bumping elbows, but the handshake is an important human gesture, and practicing it matters. So yeah, if you're uncertain about whether your handshake is good, try it on your friends. They'll tell you if it's firm and warm and confidence building, or if it's weird and soft and like an octopus. They'll let you know. Also, here's another small one: professional looking business cards. Now, I know that many of you, especially grad students, like, business cards? Why do I need business cards? Like, who wants to know me? Or, I can send them an email. But listen, business cards are just a nice professional courtesy, and it's very simple. When I meet somebody for the first time and they say their name, I might not get their name right. I might not know whether it's Catherine with a C or Catherine with a K, or I might not even know if it's Catherine or Kathy. If you give me your business card, you've now given me a way to check and make sure that I know how to spell your name and that I have a way of reaching out to you and connecting. It's a small gesture. So I do recommend business cards for everybody. Yes, even graduate students. One of the most powerful ways in which you can express your ideas is by telling stories. Now, when I say a story, that is to say, not just giving people data, but telling people a narrative that has a character, often you, and a particular challenge and what you did and what the outcome was. Stories are powerful Jedi magic. because they invite the listener to be in the narrative. It's often the case that when people listen to stories, they actually are running a little movie in their head about the story. Stories also disarm a listener's urge to quote unquote get to the ending. They want to experience what goes on. Also, stories promise pleasure and entertainment through a vicarious experience. People love to hear, oh, what did she do next? She found her experiment didn't work the first time. I wonder what she did. System one tends to operate on stories. So in a technical talk, while you may be pounding through data and talking about how you did it, one or two stories, brief stories, given during your technical talk about one particular element of the experiment can be very warming, disarming, and enjoyable for your audience. Also, as I said, the neuroscience of storytelling is now very well documented. Audience members, their brains light up in certain key areas when you're telling them a story. So it's very powerful. Okay, a final set of advice for you. I have seen very often that physics undergrads, grad students, and postdocs tend to write very long emails and tend to ask for things only once and then give up. Now, I will admit that we physicists can be shy, sometimes we're passive, and we can sometimes be not very persistent in reaching out to people who could play an important role in our career advancement. And so I'd simply say, you know, I know where this comes from, right? I know that in undergraduate and grad school, in a physics department, you're very much at the bottom of the totem pole. You've got to, you know, be respectful of everybody around you. But I think that the challenge is that you need to learn to take a small amount of social risk taking, because I think this will yield enormous rewards for you. A small amount of risk. Try being bold for a while. See how it feels and watch what it gets you. Instead of sitting in the back of the room, go up to the front. Introduce yourself to the speaker, either before or at the end of her talk. Try being a little bit more forward with people. Even as an audience member, you may be surprised at how much warmth and how much interest you might get from people, even very senior people, when you show up and are warm and engaging. So wrapping it all up today, as I said, we're Homo sapiens, so we are subject to a range of behaviors and biases. As much as we as scientists can try to reduce those biases in our processes, those biases are present, and you as a scientist must address those biases if you're going to make your communication have maximum effect, right? We want you to be effective in communicating your ideas. We want you to use all the tools to do that. So, effective technical communication requires that you not only understand your subject, but you also understand your audience. And you have to understand that your audience members have fears, needs, opinions, and desires. And you need to think about how your technical talk is going to address and touch some of those things. Everything you do communicates something about yourself. It either establishes or erodes your credibility. So all these things of body language, posture, tone, and attire matter in being a convincing person. So manage your image and behavior. Just do it with intention. Think about what message you want to send. Now, I know that effective communication, like science itself, is an extraordinarily powerful tool, and people can be manipulative with communication. You can use these tools in psychology to trick people. We have some pretty spectacular examples of that in our current era. So I simply say, as a scientist, understand these processes of emotion, understand these processes of psychology, and use those tools for good. Use it to advance good ideas, use it to advocate for yourself, and make a good impression. All right, that's it for today's presentation. I always want to steer you back to my articles in Nature magazine, where I talk about many of these issues surrounding networking, communication, strategy, and technology commercialization. And I can imagine that a number of you have been writing in questions along the way. So Crystal, I now want to open the floor to questions, and let me know what questions people have been writing in as I've been talking today. What are some questions?
Yeah, absolutely, Peter. Yeah, we got some questions coming in, and please do continue to send those along. We'll have a discussion for the next 10 minutes or so. So here's a pretty straightforward question, perhaps. I don't know. You can answer it. You talked about the importance of business cards, and you know that you encourage everyone in the audience to have them. what if you're in a situation where you don't really want to be tied to a particular institution, permanently? For example, if you're a grad student, you're about to graduate, or maybe some other reason, who knows? What is your
Or
advice
maybe you're
for
even in
people?
between, maybe even between assignments. So like, hey, I don't have a status right now. My recommendation is in those situations where you do not have an affiliation that you feel comfortable presenting on your business card. I still recommend you have your business card with your name, what you are, PhD physicist, and your contact information. Even if you don't have that beautiful logo from a university or beautiful logo from a national lab, simply having a way that people can know how to spell your name, get your accurate email address, that is sufficient. So it doesn't have to, you don't lose the right to have a business card just because you're potentially between assignments, or maybe you finished up your PhD and you're applying for jobs, but you don't have anything right now. Also, do consider that even after you finish your PhD, or even after you finish your postdoc and you might be in some transition, it's okay to use a business card that reflects the most recent assignment that you've had. Even if you've now graduated, you can simply say, explain, yeah, I got my PhD at McGill, and here's my card, and all the same contact information applies, but I'm now actually working at the Scripps Oceanographic Institute, and I'm waiting for my business card. So those are ways in which you can make sure that people understand what your current affiliation is. But under no circumstances is it better not to have a business card. It is always better to at least have your contact information and your name correctly spelled, because it simply enables people the opportunity to reach out to you. So interesting question. Thank you, Crystal.
Absolutely, Peter. Thank you for that. Okay, more questions coming in. So you talk about stories being really powerful. What if, what if the asker is saying, what if I don't really feel like there are many stories I can tell, or, trying to think about what stories would be relevant or interesting or engaging, it's hard for me to think of. Do you have advice about how to start to think about good stories that I could tell about myself?
Sure. And in fact, I think that quote unquote storytelling is not very familiar to most scientists in their training. For two reasons. One is we tend to believe in data, right? And as opposed to anecdote. And so oftentimes people are actually discouraged subtly or directly from like storytelling. No, just show me the data. Let me draw my own conclusions. Okay. I will admit that that's our effort to operate in system 2. But an ideal story to tell in system 1 to appeal to that side of your audience is to simply describe a little bit of the challenge associated with one element of the research, or one particular pivot point. One of the things that is common in a good technical talk is that people go in with a certain expectation, and at a certain point you surprise them. Well, we really thought the chelating agent was X. It turns out that that wasn't active at all, and here's why. And that's a very interesting, and often in a technical talk, a very exciting moment. People are like, oh, I was expecting that too. And so people are interested. And this is those moments in which the research conclusion has transitioned or something was disproven are great moments to just tell a bit of a story. And a story can be as simple as describing when it was and where it was and what the reaction was. Because sometimes, doing science is a human process, right? And so when you first recall that result and it challenged your preconceived notion of what was going on, a very common thing that happens to scientists is like they don't believe it, or they say, did I do something wrong? And those can be great little stories. When I first saw this spectrum, and you showed the spectrum on the screen, I really didn't know what to think. I was assuming that the centroid would be over here, but the first centroid is way over here. In fact, I was so surprised, I went back and I checked all the plugs and I reran the experiment, and I got the same result. Then I realized what I just gave you there is a perfect little story. It's a human story. It's a story of an experimenter doing her work and discovering something that she hadn't expected, which is really one of the most joyful elements of science. That's an example of how storytelling in a technical talk can really bring a new level of connection between you and your audience. Great question. Thank you, Crystal.
Yeah, Peter, that resonates with me too, because we've done lots of different panels and things like that with speakers about their career path and everything. And it always seems like at first things are kind of formal and they're talking about what they've done, but then as soon as they start talking about their experience as human beings and centering their identity as a human being, everything kind of relaxes and I don't know, just people get a little bit more engaged. So that's very good advice on how someone could do that.
Good.
You also said you encouraged everyone to be more persistent and ask for things more than once.
Yes.
But you also pointed out at the beginning that, that people might have a hard time dealing with folks that they don't relate to. And I think that we all kind of recognize that some groups, especially people who are maybe underrepresented or maybe women, do experience a challenge of being viewed as challenging or not a team player if they are assertive. Do you have any advice on how to be persistent if you're concerned about things like that?
Yes. So for starters, my first piece of advice for anybody who feels inhibited is to, first of all, examine the narrative you're telling yourself, right? If you're telling yourself a narrative of, oh, I don't want to walk up to him because, he'll think I'm too forward, or, he'll think I'm too pushy, etc. That is a narrative that you have constructed all for yourself inside your own brain. And that narrative, that story that you just told yourself, is now causing an emotional reaction in yourself. That's causing yourself fear, causing yourself doubt. Those things are of no use to you. You have, as a physicist, you do not have the data to determine whether you can anticipate how somebody else will come across, how you'll come across to somebody else. You do not have that information. Your brain wants to fill in that information with some story of fear. And so I would simply say, stop telling yourself those stories. The narrative that some of us might be seen as shrill or pushy or whatever is largely self-constructed. I will tell you that in those 5%, encounters where you might actually say something embarrassing or wrong, yeah, you'll feel a little bad momentarily. They might feel a little awkward momentarily, but even in those situations, you can recover by maintaining connectivity, by maintaining your friendliness. So I would simply say what I have observed, Crystal, with these wonderful, talented, physicists who you and I, these early career physicists who you and I have been working with for years and counseling for years, is so often they have self-doubt about, whether they should do something or not do something. And I often see people choosing not to engage or choosing not to take that risk. And so my advice to you is just dial it up a notch. Just try to be a little bit more forward. You'll feel a little uncomfortable at first, but one of the things that happens is you will often get a very positive response. There's been some psychology research that most people think that they would be happiest and that other people would be happiest if they keep to themselves. So for example, there've been experiments on commuter trains, there've been experiments done on airplanes where people assume, oh, I don't want to bother the other person, et cetera, so they stick to themselves. However, when other subjects have been essentially forced to engage with the people sitting beside them, their level of happiness goes way up on both sides, on both the person who engages and the person who receives the engagement. We are naturally a social species. We are not happy being all alone. So I would simply say, just try it. Try it for a month. Try being a little bit more forward, a little bit more socially advancing in how you engage with other people, and see how it feels. Even for the most introverted of you, I think you'll find that the response you get is generally positive. Now, I know we're in a very difficult and awkward time of literal physical isolation. That is all the more reason for you to get on the phone, get on Zoom, and reach out to people. This is the time where being a little bit gregarious can make a big difference. But that's a great question. Thank you, Crystal.
Yeah, and I think, if I may add a little bit of my thoughts on that. I mean, I hear what you're saying. I think that that's not to say that in many instances, people's fears about such assumptions are totally baseless. I mean, I think that there are all kinds of factors that contribute to them, and those factors are real. But I think your point is very well taken that, like you said, the fear and doubt doesn't actually, whether it may not be baseless, but it doesn't serve us. So I like your approach of just kind of push through that if you can, and don't let that kind of dictate your decision to engage. So,
And the other thing, Crystal, is that when more people show up, right, a little bit more forward, a little bit more warm, a little bit more gregarious, it will also renormalize everybody's expectations. So I think that, that you can be part of that change that you want to see.
Absolutely. Okay, well, great discussion. And this is all the time we have today for the official webinar. We do apologize if we did not get to your questions, but we encourage you to follow up. You can send an email to webinars@aps.org, and we can forward the questions to our speaker for comment. As I mentioned at the beginning, both a recording of the video, the recording of the video will be emailed to you. You'll receive it in your email, and also will be posted on the summer webinar homepage. Please allow 48 hours for upload of that. And lastly, please do, when you leave, make sure that you fill out the survey so that you can help us continue to offer these great services to you. Thanks everybody for your time. Thank you, Peter, for a great presentation.
You bet, Crystal. And I'll talk to you next week.
We'll see Peter next week. So everybody have a great day.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. American Physical Society, copyright 2020, all rights reserved.